It's unelected. It's anti-family. They want, in Europe, I've seen in Der Spiegel, where there won't be single-parent homes allowed anymore. They want to make everybody live in communes. I mean, this is a cult of sickos. Even the Russians, call it the new Soviet.
Yeah, the Russians do. And what is interesting is that there are quite close comparisons between the Soviet Union and the European Union. If you look at the structure, you've got a commission which meets in secret, very much like a Politburo, shall we say, and then you've got a European Parliament, which is in effect a complete joke. I mean, the whole thing is smoke and mirrors. It has no power whatsoever. The real power lies with the people who meet in secret. That very much mirrors the Supreme Soviet. There is a definite likeness between the two, and I suppose there isn't a coincidence that a lot of the commissioners do tend to be ex-communist, including the head of the commission, the president of the commission, Jose Manuel Barroso, who's an ex-Maoist. And yes, I mean, it's all about not listening to the people. And I never forget listening to Peter Mandelson, who was a minister in the Blair government and then was sacked and went on to be a European Commissioner. I never forget him as Trade Commissioner talking about what we live in now is a post-democratic society. What does that mean? What does a post-democratic society mean? It was frightening. And then to hear a couple of months later, Jose Manuel Barroso described referendums as inconvenient when the Dutch and when the French voted no to the European Lisbon Treaty. To then hear him say that the referendums were inconvenient was a disgrace. And then he went on and described the EU as the first non-imperial empire.
The first non-imperial empire, and expanding on that now. I read Economist magazine every week when it comes out, and of course it's a big establishment rag. And almost every article is how we have technocrats now, and it's good. You can have elected people, but they're not going to run anything. The central bankers that created the derivatives, and we're going to raise your taxes and have it paid to private groups, and we're going to run everything in your life, and it's good to have dictatorial groups running things. They actually admit it, but then separately for lower strata, they have the mainstream media. When I talk about it or you talk about it or Ron Paul talks about it, they call it a conspiracy theory when it's all admitted.
Well, this sort of ties in, doesn't it, to exactly what Peter Mandelson said when he spoke about the post-democratic society, where in effect he believes, and I'm sure others in the Commission believe, because this is the system that they're working in and making a lot of money out of it, I hasten to add, the system they believe works best is the one where you cut out the people, where you ignore the people, where you make the people of Ireland vote twice on 2 occasions in referendums. When the Irish people said no to the Nice Treaty, they were made to vote again. When the Irish people said no to the Lisbon Treaty, they were made to vote again. It's all about taking no notice of the people, and the EU juggernaut will march on. Even to the point now where Croatia, through a very dodgy referendum over the weekend, I hasten to add, has now voted to join the European Union. It will expand further east. It will expand, and it will expand, and it will expand. And I remember about 10 years ago, Romano Prodi, the former head of the Commission, talking about one day he looks forward to countries like Tunisia and Morocco also joining the European Union, even though they're not actually in Europe. This whole thing is expansionist, it's imperialist, and quite frankly, the sooner we, the Brits, are better off out, well, it'll be better for everybody.
Well, it certainly will. Let's look at this Iran situation. I mean, this is not even really big news here in the U.S. Iran vows to shut down Strait of Hormuz as EU passes oil embargo, and the United States and NATO have said they're going to attack Iran if they block the Strait of Hormuz, but it is an act of war to cut off their oil sales. Again, I'm not a fan of the mullahs, but, I mean, I don't think a lot of people realize this is a huge escalation. Why would the Eurocrats want to do this? Because a war is a good political distraction from their power grabbing?
I'm not sure about that. I'm not even sure they realize the brevity of the situation that they've got themselves into. I mean, let me just explain. All new contracts in crude oil and petroleum will now be banned within the EU from Iran, and also all existing contracts will be cancelled in July. On top of that, the Iranian Central Bank could have its assets frozen in the European Union. And of course we've got the problem in the Strait of Hormuz where 6 battleships or 6 warships from America, France and Britain sailed through there over the weekend in a show of strength, a show of power. It was a warning to the mullahs that we won't stand for this, and I think we are tinkering on the brink of something very, very frightening indeed, because as a response, the Iranians could well attempt to shut that strait, and then you could see the first guns fired in the conflict.
Now, I mean, if you're just joining us, you're a member of the European Union Parliament, hailing out of the UK. Paul Nuttall is our guest, member of the UK Independence Party, and he's the youngest chairman ever of that party, which is the fastest growing now in the UK as folks begin to wake up there as they're waking up here. If you're a new listener or aren't familiar with UK politics, it's basically a Ron Paul style, national sovereignty, constitutional, libertarian, conservative, just common sense. They're not globalist, Marxist, Leninist, New World Order, banker minions, basically. Looking at this and looking forward, when can we expect to see Iran respond to this? What's the time frame on these contracts?
Well, the time frame on the contracts is that it's immediate. The embargo is immediate, and as I say, existing contracts will be cut off in July, and I expect to see Iran respond pretty quickly. And I think, as I said a minute ago, I think we are tinkering on the brink of something scary. But the European Union, I mean, it was the foreign ministers of the nation states who've agreed this alongside ambassadors. So taking that aside, the European Union is encroaching international sovereignty in the area of foreign policy, because we now have the High Representative, of course, Baroness Ashton, who's never been elected to anything in her life. She's a political appointee of the European Union, and it's also now beginning to put in place embassies right across the globe, which in effect are going to supersede the embassies of the nation state. It is a complete and utter affront to democracy, and it's also a complete and utter affront to national sovereignty.
It certainly is. Now, you talk about the awakening. Give us some indicators of that you're seeing in England, in the rest of the UK. Are you starting to see an awakening in Europe to the Euro's tyranny, with the bureaucrats installing their own people over these countries that they're sucking dry right now?
Well, you've seen it happen twice now over the past 3 months. You've seen Berlusconi removed in Italy, and you've got Eurocrat now who's not been elected, placed in as Prime Minister. You've also seen the same in Greece, where Papandreou was forced aside, and now we have another Eurocrat again who hasn't been elected, who's been put in his place. So they really are showing their teeth here. They're really showing their true selves. The awakening which is going on is happening right across the board. The people are out on streets, burning EU flags in Lisbon, in Athens, in Rome. There is a real movement out there against the European Union. And what you're seeing in Northern Europe is a revolution, really, in the polls. What you're seeing in Finland, for example, with the True Finns, you're seeing it in Holland with Geert Wilders. Frighteningly enough, you're seeing it now beginning in France. If you look at the opinion polls in France, where Front National are leading in the polls out there, and it looks like Marine Le Pen could certainly get into the second round of the French presidency elections this year. There is a movement. There is an anti-EU movement right across Northern Europe. And what we're seeing here in the UK is a growth of UKIP, not only in members, but also in the opinion polls. And at the moment, UKIP is almost neck and neck with the Liberal Democrats, who are actually in government. So UKIP seems to have grown from 2 to 3% to around 8 to 11% in the opinion polls. And as I say, what we need to do is we need to keep this momentum up, and we need to ensure that the opinion poll ratings that we've got at the moment then transcend into votes at local elections. And the big one for us is 2014, where we genuinely think we can go on and cause a political earthquake in this country and win those European elections.
Now, expanding on this, and if you just joined us, we have a European Union member of Parliament, Paul Nuttall, on with us from the UK Independence Party. I know in Europe they're starting TSA-style naked body scanners, doing some groping. I know that there's more and more checkpoints on the highways, more and more internal policing, while the borders themselves in many areas are wide open. What other types of police state stuff are you seeing? I know that they've got politically correct police now out there arresting people for stuff that's legal in the U.S. I know there's all sorts of persecution of people that try to stand up for nationalism.
Yeah, I mean, the European Union doesn't like people standing up for nation states. In fact, let me just quickly move on to this. I'll come back to that. The guy who's just been elected as the president of the European Parliament is a man called Martin Schulz. He was elected last week. It was the biggest undemocratic stitch-up you've ever seen in your life. In fact, I refused to vote in it. I refused to take part in this farce. This was a presidency which was decided 2.5 years ago. Now, if you know the way the European Union Parliament works, it sits for 5 years, and you have a president whose term is 2.5 years, so in the 5 years you have 2 presidents. The European Parliament is run by 2 big groups. You have the Socialists and you have the European People's Party, which are the Conservatives. Well, they're not real Conservatives, but they pretend to be Conservatives, although they are completely Europhile and they would love more and more European Union to control people's lives. And the way it works is that for 2.5 years, the Conservatives can have their president of the Parliament, and then for the next 2.5 years, they buy those votes, and the Socialists will then have their 2.5 years as in the presidency. So this guy, Martin Schulz, is the socialist who's just become the president of the European Parliament. This man is a dangerous fanatic, more dangerous than anything you've ever seen before. I ask your listeners, go on YouTube, look at this man. He is a fanatic nationalist of the European Union. He's not known very well in Germany, but this man will be known right across Europe within the next 2.5 years. And in a way, it's the best thing that could have happened to us. It's the best thing that could have happened to UKIP, because some of us are just coming to the conclusion that worse is better. This man is the new face of Europe. Believe me, Alex, you'll be hearing a lot more of Martin Schulz in the next 2.5 years. He's a very dangerous individual.
Well, I've noticed that whenever you're speaking or Nigel Farage or others bring up real issues, they laugh at you, and they're so arrogant, and they just radiate criminal light from their eyes. I mean, you know, slimy criminal types when you see them, and these members of the bureaucracy know that you guys are ceremonial, and they arrogantly sit there and laugh at you. You're just, meant to be there so folks think that they're electing their leaders in the Euro. And I think that their hubris is something that backfires on them. And they've got to realize, from Copenhagen imploding to so many other issues, that time is running out for them.
Well, the man who does most of the laughing, it's not laughing really, it's most of the shouting, is actually Martin Schulz. He's sitting there opposite Nigel Farage, and he's shouting fascist at them, and he's screaming abuse. One trying to put them off, but actually there's real anger there, there's real hatred, it's a feeling that you surely can't be criticising the European Union. This is his beloved project. Now, this is the same Martin Schulz who's now been elected to be the president, who should be impartial. An impartial president, but we know he can't be impartial because it's not in his nature to be so. He's a very angry little man. He's also the same man who one of our members was thrown out a couple of months ago for having serious words. I mean, this guy is a pretty poor individual. He'll be a pretty poor president, but the good thing for us and the good thing for you guys on the internet is that you will now see the true face of the European Union, because everything which is wrong in politics is represented by this man.
What are you expecting to see them do next? I know that the Davos crowd announced last year they want $100 trillion. We're going to raise your taxes and have it paid to private groups, and we're going to run everything in your life. And it's good to have dictatorial groups running things. They actually admit it, but then separately for lower strata, they have the mainstream media. When I talk about it, or you talk about it, or Ron Paul talks about it, they call it a conspiracy theory when it's all admitted.
Well, this sort of ties in, doesn't it, to exactly what Peter Mandelson said when he spoke about the post-democratic society, where in effect he believes, and I'm sure
it's unelected, it's anti-family. They want, in Europe, I've seen in Der Spiegel, where there won't be single-parent homes allowed anymore. They want to make everybody live in communes. I mean, this is a cult of sickos. Even the Russians, call it the new Soviet.
Yeah, the Russians do. And what is interesting, there are quite close comparisons between the Soviet Union and the European Union. If you look at the structure, you've got a commission which meets in secret, very much like a Politburo, shall we say, and then you've got a European Parliament, which is people. And I never forget listening to Peter Mandelson, who was a minister in the Blair government and then was sacked and went on to be a European Commissioner. I never forget him as Trade Commissioner talking about what we live in now is a post-democratic society. What does that mean? What does a post-democratic society mean? It was frightening. And then to hear a couple of months later, José Manuel Barroso described referendums as inconvenient when the Dutch and when the French voted no to the European Lisbon Treaty. To then hear him say that the referendums were inconvenient was a disgrace. And then he went on and described the EU as the first non-imperial empire.
The first non-imperial empire, and expanding on that now. I mean, I read Economist magazine every week when it comes out, and of course it's a big establishment rag. And almost every article is how we have technocrats now, and it's good. You can have elected people, but they're not going to run anything. The central bankers that created the derivatives, and
in effect, a complete joke. I mean, the whole thing is smoke and mirrors. It has no power whatsoever. The real power lies with the people who meet in secret. That very much mirrors the Supreme Soviet. There is a definite likeness between the two, and I suppose there isn't a coincidence that a lot of the commissioners do tend to be ex-communist, including the head of the commission, the president of the commission, José Manuel Barroso, who's an ex-Maoist. And yes, I mean, it's all about not listening to the